"You're coming with me," the lone rancher said to the woman beaten for giving birth to 3 girls. Wyoming Territory, late January 1877. The sharp ridges of the Snowhorn Mountains towered. The wind howled like a wounded animal. But it wasn't the wind that first caught Caleb Holt's ear. It was a thin, high-pitched wail, something fragile, breakable. He reined in his horse, snow crunching under its hooves, and tilted his head toward the timberline. There it was again. A baby's cry. No, several. He squinted and dismounted. The trail hadn't been traveled in days, slicing through the trees like a gash. His boots sank ankle-deep with each step. He led his horse by the reins, listening, his breath puffing out in sharp bursts. The sound grew louder as he neared a clearing by an old fence post, half-rotted, half-buried in snow. There she was, a woman barely standing, tied cruelly to the post with barbed wire. Arms bound behind her, skin torn, wrists bleeding. Snow clung to her lashes, her hair frozen at the edges. Her lips were cracked, her face pale as death except for the violet bruises blooming across her cheekbones. At her feet, 3 tiny bundles newborns, no older than a day. One whimpered weakly. The others lay silent, wrapped in the shredded remains of a nightgown. The woman's head stirred faintly. She was conscious, just. "Don't let them take my daughters," she whispered. Caleb dropped to one knee beside her without hesitation. He pulled off his gloves and checked the babies. Their breathing was shallow but steady, their skin cold, the kind that seeps into the bone. "You're coming with me," he said, voice low, steady, certain. She blinked slowly, as if struggling to process his words. He drew a knife from his boot and cut the barbed wire. It had bitten deep into her forearms, blood welling where the rusted steel tore free. She didn't cry out, didn't flinch. He wrapped his arms around her waist to steady her as her legs gave way. Her body was limp, heavy with exhaustion and blood loss. Caleb didn't pause. He lifted her, cradling her against his chest, then gathered the babies one by one. He tucked the smallest inside his coat, securing them with a thick wool blanket from his saddle. They barely stirred. The wind surged, slicing across the clearing. He shielded them with his body as best he could. His horse nickered nervously nearby. Caleb glanced at the horizon. A half-mile uphill to his cabin, through snow. He adjusted his grip on Lydia, tightened the blanket around the infants, and whispered, maybe to her, maybe to the babies, maybe to the heavens, "You don't die here, not on my land." He mounted the horse carefully, keeping her in front of him, the babies nestled between them. She weighed almost nothing, the infants lighter than winter rabbits. The cold had drained them. Time was not their ally. The trail back was slow, the wind relentless, but Caleb moved without stopping. There was no time to ask who she was or what demons hunted her, only time to keep her alive. The cabin was dark when they arrived, the fire long cold. Caleb kicked open the door, carried her inside, and laid her gently on a bed of quilts by the hearth. The babies followed, placed in a basket lined with rabbit pelts. He turned to stoke the fire, hands steady, not yet shaking. Outside, snow fell, covering the tracks to her place of torment. Inside, Caleb worked by firelight, silent and sure. A stranger had been left to die, but not here, not on his land. The cabin was simple 4 wooden walls and a sloped roof, groaning under the snow's weight. But it was dry, and the fire Caleb Holt kindled now crackled with life. Warmth crept slowly from the hearth, pushing back the cold that clung to the room's corners like a second skin. Caleb moved with quiet precision. He hung his soaked coat by the fire and peeled off his gloves, revealing calloused, cracked hands. Lydia lay unconscious on a pile of wool blankets in the corner. Her lips were blue, her hands loosely wrapped in linen strips. She hadn't stirred since they arrived. The babies began to whimper, low and weak, but alive. Caleb filled an iron pot with goat-ass milk from a jug hidden behind stacked firewood and set it to warm over the flames. He found a small pine-carved feeding spoon and placed it beside a tin bowl. Then he approached Lydia. Her breathing was shallow but even. He dipped a cloth in warm water, wrung it out, and began cleaning the dried blood from her ankles and calves. Bruises ran deep, mean purple-black swells along her shins, marks of cruel, repeated kicks. Her knees were scraped raw. He worked gently, wiping, covering her legs with the blanket's edge. She didn't wake. When the milk warmed, he poured some into the tin bowl and tested it on his wrist. Still too hot. He waited, watching the smallest baby, now crying with thin, urgent whimpers. He crouched by the makeshift cradle and reached in. Her skin was warming, a good sign. Using the spoon, he fed her tiny sips. She took them clumsily, then greedily. He did the same with the other two, pausing to wipe their mouths and tuck the blankets closer around their heads. A faint sound came from the bed. Lydia stirred, her eyelids fluttering like leaves in the wind. Her voice cracked, barely audible. "My name's Lydia, Lydia Kane." Caleb crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt beside her. "Caleb," he said simply. Her lips moved again, but no sound followed. Her gaze drifted to the babies, now quiet in the fire's glow. The smallest sneezed. Lydia's eyes flooded with tears, but she didn't cry, not truly. Just a silent stream down cracked cheeks, her body too tired to sob. Caleb stood and moved to the back of the room. From a trunk, he pulled a thick elk-hide cloak lined with rabbit fur. He folded it and placed it beneath the sleeping infants, making their cradles softer, warmer. When he glanced back, Lydia was watching. He didn't speak, only nodded slowly and returned to the hearth to add more wood. Sparks rose like fireflies, vanishing into the cabin's smoke-stained rafters. Time passed quietly. The only sounds were the fire's pop, the wind's soft howl outside, and the shifting breaths of 4 souls returning from death's edge. Later, as Caleb fed the fire one last time before resting, Lydia's voice came again, firmer, not stronger, but certain. "You didn't leave us." He didn't reply. He sat by the fire, staring into it as the snow raged against the walls. The cold held at bay for now. The storm softened to a hush. Snow still fell, but the wind had died, leaving a heavy stillness that wrapped the cabin like a shroud. Inside, the fire glowed low and steady, casting flickers of gold across the rough timber walls. Lydia lay propped on folded blankets, her face regaining some color, though bruises still bloomed beneath her skin like ink stains. Her voice was hoarse, throat raw from cold and crying, but she could speak now. Caleb sat nearby, sharpening a blade on the whetstone with slow, careful strokes. He hadn't asked her anything, not who she was, not who had done this, not why she'd been left to die. That silence was its own kindness. "I was 17 when I married Ezra Kane," Lydia said suddenly, her voice quiet but clear. "He was 34, rich, powerful. My father said I was lucky. Caleb didn't look up. He kept sharpening the knife, slow and steady. I thought I was lucky too, at first, she continued. He brought me to a big house with tall windows and marble floors. I wore silk, slept on feather pillows. But he never touched me kindly, never gently. She paused, glancing at the sleeping babies by the fire, their tiny chests rising and falling in rhythm. First daughter, he frowned. Second, he stopped speaking to me. Third, her voice cracked. Caleb looked up, his eyes calm, steady, waiting. When the third girl was born, he called the midwife a witch, said I'd cursed his line. He told his brothers I was no better than a mule, useless without a son. That night, they beat me. She turned her face slightly, revealing a faint scar along her jawline, old, faded. I thought he'd kill me. Instead, he dragged me to that fence post and tied me there. Said if the snow didn't take me, I was meant to live. Called it justice. Her hands trembled as she spoke, one reaching instinctively toward the basket holding her daughters. They said girls are nothing but mouths to feed, she whispered. Caleb set the blade down. He didn't speak right away. His jaw flexed once, tightly. Then he stood and crossed to her, his boots silent on the cabin floor. Kneeling beside her cot, he took her swollen, bruised hand as if it were glass, holding it gently in his weathered palm. His voice was low, certain. Here, he said, your girls are the only thing worth feeding. Lydia's eyes filled with tears. This time she let them fall silently down her cheeks, mixing with the firelight and the sound of her daughter's breathing. Caleb stayed kneeling beside her, hand in hers, his presence quiet and grounding. Outside, the snow kept falling. But inside, something shifted. Not just warmth, but something deeper, like the start of a promise. Snow began to melt around the cabin's edges, turning white drifts to gray slush, revealing patches of frozen earth. The mountains stirred from their long sleep, but spring brought more than thaw. It brought word from the lowlands. Just after dawn, a knock came. Caleb opened the door to find a woman bundled in a green wool shawl, breath fogging in the morning air. Her cheeks were flushed from the ride, her horse tied to a nearby pine, twitching from exertion. "Morning, Caleb," she said, voice clipped and urgent. "Bess," he greeted, stepping aside. "Come in." Lydia sat by the fire, holding one of the babies. Bess glanced at her, then turned to Caleb as he shut the door. "It's about her," Bess said. Ezra Keynes put out word. Caleb stood still. "He's saying she ran off in a fit, that she's unstable. Says the babies are his by right, that she's keeping them in secret against the law." Lydia's eyes widened, fingers clenching around the infant. "He's hired men," Bess continued. "4 of them. Say they're just bringing a mother home, but the way they ride, it ain't no rescue." Caleb nodded once. That was all. Bess looked between them. "I rode up soon as I heard. They'll find this place." "They won't take her," Caleb said. Lydia met his gaze, something unreadable passing through her eyes. Bess hesitated, then pulled a small leather pouch from her coat-dried lentils, jerky, a flask of spirits. "You'll need it." He took it with a silent nod. She left soon after. The day passed in motion. Caleb repaired the rear window's latch, reinforced the door with a second crossbar, and stacked firewood by the hearth so Lydia wouldn't need to venture out. He moved supplies to the root cellar in case they needed to hide or flee. He spoke little, sharpening his hunting knife until its edge gleamed like silver, then slid it into the sheath at his belt. They slept lightly that night. Morning brought an eerie quiet, no birds, no wind, then hooves, 4 sets. Lydia clutched her daughters close. Caleb opened the cabin door and stepped out. The riders approached slowly, faces half hidden under wide-brimmed hats. The leader, scarred down one cheek, wore a revolver at his side. "Caleb Holt," he called. "We come with a claim." Caleb stood firm. "No, that woman inside is Ezra Kane's wife, his property. We've got every right to retrieve her and them girls." Caleb didn't move, his voice calm, clear. "She was never his, and she sure as hell ain't yours," the man sneered. "Think this is over, Mountain Man?" Caleb didn't blink. "Come back and try." The riders stared for a long moment, then the leader tugged his reins. "Not worth it today," he barked. They rode off, snow spraying, but their eyes promised return. Caleb stood at the threshold long after they vanished. Inside, Lydia exhaled slowly, still clutching her daughters, heart thundering. They were safe for now. But the shadows from the lowlands weren't done reaching up the mountain. Spring unfurled slowly across the mountainside, softening snow and coaxing green buds from bare branches. The cabin, once a shield against death's chill, began to feel like a home. Lydia moved with quiet purpose now, no longer flinching at the wind or the fire's crackle. She cooked simple meals over the hearth stews of pine roots, wild onions, and whatever Caleb brought from the woods, mushrooms, rabbits, sometimes grouse, once a wild turkey. The 3 girls, Clara, Esther, and May, grew stronger by the week. Their cheeks plumped, their cries turned sweeter, like birds learning to sing. They slept in nests of coyote pelts and hay, lined with scraps of an old quilt Caleb had never used until now. Mornings were calm. Lydia rose before dawn to tend the fire and check the girls. Caleb was often gone, hunting or checking traps, always returning without a note. Their words were sparse, not cold, but gentle, like 2 people learning the language of each other's silence. He never asked about her past. She never spoke of it. The pain was buried like bones under frost. Small comforts took root. One afternoon, Lydia found Caleb outside at a workbench, coat off, sleeves rolled up, carving a cedar plank with precise strokes. He didn't look up, but knew she was there. That night, she saw his work, 3 small wooden plaques above the baby's cradle, each bearing a name: Clara, Esther, May in neat, smoothed script, the wood oiled to catch the firelight. Lydia pressed her fingers to her lips to stifle a sob. No one had ever carved her daughters' names into anything lasting. Now they hung like prayers. Days turned gold and green. Lydia sang lullabies to the girls at dusk, psalms her mother once hummed while braiding her hair. Caleb sat by the door, sharpening tools or cleaning his rifle, always listening. One evening, with rain-scented air and the smell of pine and soil, Lydia stirred a pot over the fire, humming softly. Without planning it, she spoke his name fully, deliberately. Caleb Holt. The room stilled. He turned slowly, hands pausing, eyes catching the fire's glow like embers waiting for air. He looked at her, truly looked, as if his name on her lips had shifted something within him. "I never thanked you," she whispered. "Not properly." Caleb rose quietly, stepped closer, but didn't touch her. He glanced at the pot, the sleeping girls, then back to her eyes. "You didn't need to," he said. A long silence settled, not awkward, but full, heavy with unspoken things now alive in the air, the fire, their shared presence. She smiled faintly, not a smile of resolution, but of beginnings. Caleb, who rarely spoke 10 sentences a day, nodded once and returned to his seat. Outside, the wind stirred. Rain was coming, but not yet. Inside, the fire burned steady, and the quiet felt like peace. The storm rolled in after dusk, low and fierce, turning the wind cruel and the sky into a roaring white fury. Snow slashed sideways against the cabin walls, thick enough to erase tracks in minutes, wild enough to disorient a man steps from his door. Inside, the fire snapped and hissed. The windows rattled. Caleb checked the shutters while Lydia held Esther and May close, her body curled around them. Clara slept by the fire, unaware of the rising tension. Caleb froze. He stepped to the window, brushed frost from the glass, and peered into the blizzard. 3 figures horsemen moved through the storm, cloaks tight, heads bowed, approaching with deliberate intent. "It's them," he said. Lydia's breath caught. She knew who. Caleb turned, voice low and urgent. "Take the girls. Follow the creek. Stay low. Don't stop. Don't come back unless it's with the law." Her eyes widened, but he was already moving. He draped the elk-hide cloak over her shoulders, tucked jerky, dried apples, and a flask into her satchel, and pressed a small blade into her palm. "Keep it close. If they catch you, don't hesitate." She stared, lips trembling. "And you?" "I'll lead them away." He kissed Clara's head, quick and silent, then said, "Go." Lydia bundled the girls, 2 in her arms, one strapped to her back and slipped out the back, vanishing into the trees. Caleb watched the door close, then set to work. He tied his spare coat to a broomstick and propped it by the southern trail. He lit an oil lamp and hid it behind a log to cast shadows. He tethered his horse halfway down the trail, as if left in haste, and kindled a small fire to draw attention with its smoke. Then he returned to the cabin and waited. A hard knock came minutes later. Caleb opened the door to 3 snow-covered men. Ezra Kane stood at the front, handsome but cold, his eyes like the storm itself. "She took what's mine," he said, voice slicing through the wind. "Those girls carry my name." Caleb stepped onto the porch, closing the door. "You came this far for lies? I took her from you because you left her to die." Ezra snarled, drawing a pistol. "She belongs to me." Caleb stood firm. "She belongs to herself." Ezra's jaw twitched. "Last chance." Caleb didn't flinch. "You'll have to shoot me." One of Ezra's men swung a rifle butt, striking Caleb's shoulder. He staggered, hitting the doorframe, blood blooming at his shirt's seam as he fell to one knee. Ezra aimed his gun, but a new voice cut through loud, righteous. A lantern swung from the tree line. Sheriff Boone rode up, flanked by 2 deputies, rifles raised. Ezra turned to see Lydia emerge from the woods, cloak torn, face streaked with snow and resolve. "Tell them what you did," she said, voice hard. "Or I will." Ezra froze. "Whose?" The sheriff's horse snorted. "Arrest him," Boone ordered. Ezra's gun fell. The deputies cuffed the 3 men, dragging them through the snow as Ezra's protests faded. Lydia rushed to Caleb, still slumped against the door, blood dripping into the snow. She knelt, eyes teary but steady. "You're not dying," she said. Hear me? He grunted, breath ragged. Not planning on it. Good. She pressed her hand to his wound, staunching the blood. I won't bury the only man who stood between us and hell. Caleb looked up, pain etching his face, but he smiled. Knew you'd come back. Spring crept back into the valley, wildflowers piercing thawed earth, robins singing from pines. The storm had passed, and wounds on skin, in memory, between two souls began to heal. Caleb's shoulder mended slowly. Lydia bandaged it daily with steady hands. He never complained. She never fussed. Life had been cruel, yet here they were, breathing, moving, building from what remained. Together, they rebuilt the cabin. What was once a battered shelter grew into a home. Caleb extended the east wall for a larger hearth. Lydia painted the shutters green with leftover pigment from Bess. They opened their doors to travelers, fur traders, timber haulers, ranch hands. Word spread of a warm meal and safe rest near the ridge's second switchback. They called it the hearth at Holt Ridge. Lydia cooked hearty stews, venison, root vegetables, cornbread with honey. Caleb hunted, chopped wood, tended stables, and ensured no trouble crossed the threshold. The girls grew fast. Clara walked first, Esther spoke first, fire, and May sang before speaking. Laughter filled the cabin. One evening, after the last traveler left, Lydia found Caleb on the porch, sanding a board. He reached into a satchel and pulled out a burgundy shawl, hand-woven, embroidered with 3 initials C, E, M, and beneath them, in bold letters, Worthy. She ran her fingers over the stitching, breath-catching. You made this? She whispered. He nodded. For you. Because you are. She pulled the shawl close, a pause heavy with meaning. You chose us when you could have walked away. Caleb stepped forward, took her hand, and looked into her eyes. No proposal, no grand words, just a promise. That night, by the fire's glow, they made their vows with quiet voices and steady hearts. Caleb gave her no ring, but a string of carved beads for the girls, looped over their wrists as they slept. For Lydia, he offered his hand. She took it, and with it, everything that mattered. No flowers, no priest, just 2 people, a fire, and enough. Spring claimed the mountain fully. Snow gave way to moss and wild violets along the path to the cabin. Pine mingled with wood smoke, herbs, and fresh bread. The girls' laughter rang out, Clara, Esther, and May chasing each other, dresses grass-stained, hair wild. Lydia watched from the kitchen window, hands dusted with flour, a soft smile on her lips. The hearth at Holt Ridge was more than a refuge now, a quiet legend among travelers seeking not just food, but peace. They sat at the rough table, sipping pine tea, listening to the girls' laughter. Lydia served with grace, slipping rolls into coat pockets for the road. Caleb tended garden rows, potatoes, carrots, squash, beans. When the girls napped, Lydia taught local children to read by chalkboard. Some walked miles for her lessons, staying to hear her sing. Each night, the hearth was lit, not from fear of cold, but from memory of it. One evening, Caleb sat on the porch, boots earthy, a basket of beans beside him. Lydia joined him with 2 mugs, resting her hand on his. Her touch was light, familiar. His fingers curled beneath hers. She watched their daughters play under the setting sun, then turned to him. This fire between us, it never went out. Caleb gazed ahead, eyes crinkling. It just needed a place to live. They sat, hand in hand, as the sky turned lavender and stars emerged. No passerby would know the full story, the blood, the storm, the fight, but they'd see her smile, his gaze, the girls dancing in mountain sunlight, and know something enduring had been built. Not from wealth or war, but from a stubborn, beautiful love that outlasted the harshest winter and stayed. Thank you for joining this tale of fire, frost, and a love that refused to fade. In a land where justice was scarce and warmth scarcer, Caleb and Lydia showed that the strongest homes are built from trust, sacrifice, and choosing each other when walking away would have been easier. If this story stirred you, if it reminded you that love can take root in the harshest places, subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more unforgettable journeys into the heart of the American frontier where, first, bullets missed but hearts didn't. Tap the bell to never miss a tale that might linger with you forever.